Hello everybody at Petham, and especially the children of Swallow's class. Now, I'm not here today to share a recipe with you or to do any baking because that's Mrs. King's area of expertise, I'm afraid. But I am here to share with you one of my favourite stories, and that is the Lighthouse Keeper's Lunch. So make yourselves comfortable and let's begin. Once there was a lighthouse keeper called Mr. Grinling. At night time he lived in a small white cottage perched high upon the cliffs. In the daytime he rowed out to his lighthouse on the rocks to clean and polish the light. Mr. Grinling was a most industrious lighthouse keeper. Come rain or shine, he tended his light. Sometimes at night, as Mr. Grinling lay sleeping in his warm bed, the ships would toot to tell him that his light was shining brightly and clearly out to sea. You can see one here. Each morning, while Mr. Grinling polished the light, Mrs. Grinling worked in the kitchen of the little white cottage on the cliffs, concocting a delicious lunch for him. Once she had prepared this lunch, she packed it into a special basket and clipped it onto the wire that ran from the little white cottage all the way down to the lighthouse. But one Monday, something terrible happened. Mrs. Grinling had prepared a particularly appetising lunch. She had made a seafood salad, a lighthouse sandwich, a peach surprise, some iced sea biscuits, some cold chicken, some sausages and crisps, some fruit and drinks, and she packed it off in the basket and sent it away down the wire. But the lunch did not arrive. It was spotted by 3 scavenging seagulls who set upon it and devoured it with great gusto. "Clear off, you varmint," shouted Mr. Grinling. But the seagulls took not the slightest bit of notice. "This is an excellent peach surprise, boys." "She's a great cook, Fred." "Scrumptious lunch," said Tom. That evening, Mr. and Mrs. Grinling decided on a plan to baffle the seagulls. "Tomorrow I shall tie a napkin to the basket," said Mrs. Grinling. "Of course, my dear," agreed Mr. Grinling. "A sound plan." Uh-oh. They'll have to try harder than this if they're to stop us. So it looks as though Mrs. Grinling's plan didn't work. On Tuesday evening, Mr. and Mrs. Grinling racked their brains for another plan. "They are a brazen lot, those seagulls," said Mr. Grinling. "A brazen lot indeed," said Mrs. Grinling. "But what shall we do?" "Our cat does not like seagulls," said Mrs. Grinling. "No, my dear," said Mr. Grinling. "Hamish is an accomplished seagull chaser." "Of course," exclaimed Mrs. Grinling. "Tomorrow Hamish can guard the lunch." "A most ingenious plan," agreed Mr. Grinling. Hamish did not think that this plan was ingenious at all. He spat and he hissed as Mrs. Grinling secured him to the basket. "There, there, Hamish," said Mrs. Grinling. "I'll have a tasty piece of herring waiting for you when you arrive home." And there he is, not looking rather impressed. Sadly, flying did not agree with Hamish. His fur stood on end when the basket swayed, his whiskers drooped when he peered down at the wet blue sea, and he felt much too sick even to notice the seagulls, let alone scare them away from the lunch. So there they go again, eating away. "Pretty kitty, like a piece of lobster. This food gets better every day." "Aren't you going to chase us then, Kitty?" said the 3rd seagull. "Lack-a-day, lack-a-day," said Mr. Grinling sadly, and "meow, meow," agreed Hamish pitifully. On Wednesday evening, Mr. and Mrs. Grinling racked their brains again for another plan. "What shall we do?" said Mr. Grinling. Mrs. Grinling looked thoughtful. "I have it," she said. "Just the mixture for hungry seagulls." "Indeed, my dear," said Mr. Grinling. "What have you in mind?" "Wait and see," said Mrs. Grinling. "Just wait and see." "Mustard sandwiches," chuckled Mr. Grinling. "A truly superb plan, my dear. Truly superb." And there we go, we've got the mustard in the sandwiches. On Thursday morning, Mrs. Grinling carefully packed the mustard sandwiches and sent them down the wire to the expectant seagulls. "Yuck! Ugh! Ark!" said the seagulls. On Friday, Mrs. Grinling repeated the mustard mixture. "All right, boys, let's go and have lunch somewhere else." "It's the same as yesterday's lunch, Fred." So on Saturday, up in the little white cottage on the cliffs, a jubilant Mrs. Grinling put away the mustard pot before she prepared another scrumptious lunch for Mr. Grinling. While he waited for his lunch down in the lighthouse on the rocks, Mr. Grinling sang snatches of old sea shanties as he surveyed the coastline through his telescope. And this is what he saw. "No mustard sandwiches in here. We'll fly back here for tomorrow's lunch. This is a delicious chocolate eclair." And you can see that the seagulls have found somebody else's lunch to devour. "Ah well, such is life," mused Mr. Grinling as he sat down to enjoy a leisurely lunch in the warm sunshine. And that's the end of the story. So eventually they managed to fool the seagulls. So I'm going to set you a little challenge now, and I want you to have a look around your house and see what materials you can find, because I would like you to make me something. And I'd like you to have a go at making me a lighthouse, a little bit like this one here from the story of the lighthouse keeper's lunch. So have a think about the shape of a lighthouse and what you might have around your house that you could use to make a lighthouse. Now I've had a little look around my house and I have found a couple of little things here, the sorts of things that you might try to use. So this is the tube from the inside of a toilet roll. You might have plenty of these around in your house at the moment. If you do, save them. You could make a small lighthouse. You could maybe put some together to make a taller lighthouse. Or if you have kitchen towel or kitchen roll in your kitchen at home, you might use a slightly larger one. But think about what you might put on the top and think about how you might secure it on the base. So that's your challenge. Have a go at making a lighthouse. But don't forget to take a picture and send it to us so we can see all of your wonderful work. Bye for now.